Okay.
Let's go ahead and turn these lights off, huh? Yeah, we don't need that. The daylight is just as good. Okay, wow. Wowee, what a day. Let's see what we have, folks. Do we have a thingamajig here? I don't think we do. I'm always looking for a mic, folks. I'm always looking for a mic. Do you guys know? No? That's okay. You know, the next classroom we can use a mic. But today's class, we're just going to use my loud, booming voice. Wow! Hello, everybody! Thank you so much for having me. I am Graham Smith. I'm an independent film director in cinematic studies, volunteer teacher. Now, I started teaching out in Oregon State University, okay, out in beautiful Corvallis. And then I went around and started teaching at the university out in Portland, and then in Eugene, U of O, and then in California. Of course, I made a couple stops, and this is one of my stops here in California, was to come down to Chico State University. Wowee! What a community. What a beautiful campus you guys have. Let me tell you. Wow. I was not expecting to walk into such a beautiful Art Deco, style. This place just screams California, and I love that. I love that. So, I'm so glad you guys all came. I'm glad that I was invited to teach, and without further ado, let's not waste any time. Let's jump into why I'm here. As I said, I am a director, and I love movies. Who doesn't love movies here? Go ahead, raise your hand. Nobody, right? We all love movies. Movies tell stories. Movies shape who we are. Movies are a great form of our expression as humanity. Okay? Now, I've been going over all kinds of things in my class, and typically what I do is I bring one of my many scripts that I work on constantly, and I bring them into class, and we go over why they're good scripts and why you won't find another script quite like it. But I think I'm going to go a different direction with today's class. I'm going to do more of a deep dive into just, into scripts, but not so much a script that I've made, but a script, how a good script should be made, how a good script is written. And we're going to dive into something I like to call the subconscious language of cinema. All right, write that down. On my Zoom class, make sure you write that down as well. The subconscious language of cinema. Okay? Now, what is that? Right? They tell me, well, Graham, what is the subconscious, language of cinema? Well, it's not necessarily English. It's something that you feel. Okay? It's the language of the subconscious. Our brains are 1 billion years old. That's how old our brains are. And learning how to trust our brain is everything to do with learning how to do the work needed in the subconscious. Right? And, this is where we get a sense of spirituality. Because what I teach is bridging the gap, bridging the gap between spirituality and screenwriting. Nowadays, a lot of what's wrong with Hollywood and their movies is, all we got are a bunch of movies that are just impulse. They're just trying to feed the appetites of the masses, and really, they're insulting to us. Hollywood doesn't care about us. Hollywood doesn't think we're intelligent. Hollywood doesn't try to emotionally teach us intelligence. And what the hell is self-expression without emotional intelligence of some kind? So that's what I'm here to teach you. And it's called the subconscious language of cinema, okay? So why do audiences feel things before they understand them? Right? Why do audiences feel things before they understand them? Okay? Well, you got to look at the mechanics of the subconscious, right? The subconscious, okay, this is just how our brain, you got to understand the brain works, okay, right? Our brain is wired to feel things before we process information. That's just how it works. It's the default network setting of our brain, okay? And this has everything to do with visual psychology and symbolic conditioning and neurocinematic language, okay? And this is in every movie that you've ever seen. Any movie, you pick any movie that has a spiritual, pick any movie that you feel connected to, right? Emotional. And you'll see exactly what I mean, okay? So, and I'm breaking this down real easy for you guys, so bear with me, okay? Because it's very easy and very simple, but it's so often missed. And so I'm trying to bridge the gap, and that's what I'm doing. Okay? So what do we got here? The audience, okay? The audience feels first. You're writing a good script, the audience should feel something first, okay? They can understand second. Understanding is always secondary, but feeling is the first thing, okay? I mean, for example, why can music make a scene emotional before anything happens? Think about it. Why does music make a scene feel emotional before anything happens? Because just like movies and just like our thought processes, music makes us feel. It makes us feel things. Okay? And if you don't have the feel first, then your script is going to be, paddywhacks. Okay? Why do we instinctively distrust certain camera angles? Think about that for a second. When the angle of your scene is crooked, for example, that makes people uneasy. Because we're always looking for perfection. We're always looking for, we don't trust something that's a little twisted or a little off, right? Why can color and repetition create anxiety? Again, it's because we're looking for perfection most of the time. It's just hardwired into our human brain. Any miscalculations or any discrepancies is going to throw us off. And so these are things that you want to do purposely in your script, I tell you what. Cinema speaks a subconscious language long before anything happens. Okay? Long before the plot arrives in a story. Okay? And the viewer's nervous system is reacting constantly. It's a constant thing. It's always going. Okay? It's visually a rhythm. It's symbolically a rhythm. It's psychological. It's psychologically a rhythm. And it's before conscious thought can catch up. Okay? All of this happens because the brain hates uncertainty. The brain hates uncertainty. Tension is incomplete information. Okay? When there's tension in a story or tension in your life or whatever, tension creates an incomplete. Excuse me, I got a phone call. They're going to have to call me back. I'm in the middle of teaching a class. Forgive me, folks. Sorry. All right, now tension is incomplete information, right? Okay, the human brain constantly searches for patterns. We're always looking for patterns. It's what we do. We look for meaning. We look for prediction. We look for closure, right? The final solution. So it makes sense, right? Because we have to make sense of everything. It's the human ego. Our ego is what creates meaning in this life. So of course we're obsessed with closure and prediction and meaning. And cinema, good cinema that is, manipulates the biological instinct. And that is why unanswered questions create suspense. Okay? Creates visual ambiguity. It creates this uneasiness. It creates this silence. Okay? And the silence creates anticipation. And the audience begins mentally participating in your script when you're going about it this way. For example, okay, a door is slightly open in a dark door. Oh, dark hallway. Okay? I lost my pen. Hold on. I'll give you a visual representation of what I'm saying. So look, we got a door. A door. Okay? And the door is slightly open. Ever so slightly open in this dark, dark hallway. Okay, here's the dark hallway, here's our door, and it's slightly open. And we're watching this on the screen, right? And nothing happens. Nothing happens. Yet the audience feels the tension, right? We're just staring at this slightly open door in this dark hallway, and we're like, something's going to happen. Jump scared, you know, someone important is going to walk through the door, and nothing happens. But we keep the audience on edge. Why? Because the brain starts generating all those possibilities, and we're allowing our audience, no, we're encouraging our audience, we are pushing our audience to start generating their own possibilities, their own interpretations, to think for themselves. And the fear often comes from not knowing. So let's look at it this way. Let me get a. Oh, here we go. Sorry, forgive me, folks. It's a brand new classroom. I've never been here before. Okay, so right, the audience feels first, and we want their interpretations. Oh, whoops. There you go. You know. So anyway, like I was saying, look, we've got our unknown, our unknown. Okay? And then we've got our prediction. Dun, dun, dun. Prediction. Okay? Which then will create anticipation. Right? Right. Which then, the most beautiful part, creates an emotional response. Y'all get that? Okay? Unknown, unknown leads to our prediction. Our brain starts racing. We start predicting, and then that leads us into anticipation, trying to anticipate what or what not might happen, which then leads us to this beautiful, this breathtaking emotional response that shows the beauty of the raw human psyche. Okay? Suspense is not action. Okay? Suspense is expectation. Okay? And this is a reoccurring theme throughout this whole little lecture I'm giving you guys, okay? Because repetition should be used as subconscious conditioning, right? Repetition, and forgive me folks, I got a lot to go through here, so I might be going kind of quick, but you can always go on Moodle, no, not Moodle, oh goodness, we don't use Moodle anymore, it's, sorry, I am nervous, it's a brand new school and new kids and everything. Anyway, you know, the program, whatever the program is, Anyway, this will be online Canvas. For God's sakes, it's right in front of me. Canvas. This will be on Canvas later if you do not get some of what we teach today. Okay? But yes, like I was saying, repetition. Repetition is what creates, all right? It creates emotional programming. Okay? Repetition creates emotional programming. Period. When you as a filmmaker repeat and repeat and repeat, you're further creating the emotional programming which gives the audience the guide to making their own interpretation of what the story, what the plot, and what the film is about. Not so much for the whole, eternity of the world, but to them personally, which in return creates great thoughts of unity. So when filmmakers repeat sounds, when filmmakers repeat colors and objects, musical themes, the theme of the hero, the theme of the villain, the theme of the anti-hero, and the repetition of visual framing. Okay, the audience subconsciously assigns meaning to them. Think for yourself. And eventually the object itself triggers emotion. For example, let's write a couple examples down, okay? For example, what about a flickering light? I'm not a very good artist, so forgive me. But pretend this is a light bulb. Okay? That's a great example, a flickering light in a hallway, right? There's the dark hallway, and there's the flickering light, just like the slightly open door earlier. Or, for example, another good example is a distant train horn. You ever hear you hear the train horn from a distance when you're out and about, right? That is, that creates an emotional trigger of some kind. Or how about a red jacket, right? Showing a red jacket throughout a film to symbolize something, as a metaphor. What will you? Whatever your interpretation is. A melody. A cigarette lighter. Or how about rain outside a window? Tapping on the window. At first, they mean nothing. But after repetition, they become, like I said, emotional triggers. Symbolism is like teaching the audience a secret emotional language without them realizing that they've learned it. A repeated image in cinema behaves like a bruise, and every time you touch it, the pain deepens. And it's a beautiful thing. And it's one of the best, one of the many tactics you want to go about when it comes to writing a good script or making a good film, just in general. Okay? Now, more into the film side of things, there is such thing as camera language, as we touched on a little bit earlier, right? Zoom in, zoom out, crooked angles, right? That makes you feel uneasy, that kind of thing, okay? And that's because the camera is not neutral. The camera is never neutral. Even if it's in a fixed position, it's not necessarily neutral. Okay? It shouldn't be. Camera placement psychologically changes the power dynamic in a scene, or the power in the scene, and the vulnerability and the intimacy in a scene, or between characters, the alienation. Okay? For example, maybe a low angle, right? A low angle creates, for example, maybe dominance. 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 Maybe a low angle creates mythology. Right? The low angle could also create intimidation. These are some of the things that our brain is probably going to race to try to understand this low angle. Same thing with the high angle, right? The high angle is no different in its effect, right? Let's look at the high angle, okay? High angles, looking down on characters and stuff, it could create weakness, or could symbolize weakness, right? And isolation. And maybe even exposure. Usually of characters. But it could be set and setting too. Right? The angle is very much subconscious language. The camera is never neutral. At least it shouldn't be. That's lazy writing if your camera is neutral. It's lazy cinematography if your camera is just neutral. And it's not a matter of the camera being, in a fixed position or something like that. No, it's just a matter of how are you going to put it in this fixed position, right? How are you going to go about it? Everything must be intentional. You got to put intention in everything you do. And it's got to be emotional, but more importantly, it's got to be spiritual. But the emotional path is how you get to the spiritual path. That's kind of what I'm showing you indirectly here, okay? Let's look at the extreme close-up, for example. Or as another example, right? Extreme close-up. Extreme close-up. Okay? Extreme close-ups are crazy, right? They're very, very close up. They're just, whoa, you're like right there. And it feels invasive. It could feel almost uncomfortable, depending on how you go about it, right? And that's just furthering the conveying of, people's interpretations of such. Another thing is the, distant wide shots, for example. And there's so many examples of this, but just to make it kind of easy, I'll throw an easy one at you. Citizen Kane. In Citizen Kane, we have distant wide shots in a couple of parts of the movie, right? And why did Orson Welles choose this? Well, because it can make the characters feel spiritually small, insignificant. It can show the characters as emotionally lost. It can show the characters as insignificant. Okay? For example, why does a person crying in a wide shot feel different than a person crying in a close-up shot? Any ideas? Well, all right, one shows emotion, just blunt, right? Just one shows emotion. Whereas the other one shows loneliness. It's more emotionally intelligent. It's more thought out, more perspective. Okay, these are all reasons why camera angles are very, very important. Whether it's close-ups or distant wide shots or low angles, high angles, all of those things are necessary. Let me double check my zoom here, folks. Double check here. Oh, okay.